Show. We clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from a leech, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. It is Wednesday, December 1st, and it is not a normal day because this is a day where the Supreme Court of the United States is hearing arguments that could likely, based on the makeup of the Supreme Court and the history and beliefs of the majority of the members of the Supreme Court at this point, it is likely that Roe v. Wade could be overturned. So I want to talk about something. There's an extraordinary campaign going on right now where there's a workaround, abortion pills. Now, of course, this is a prop. There are no abortion pills in it, but I am showing abortion pills. Now, we've talked about reproductive rights on the show extensively. This is not a new topic that we discuss. We have Femme Fridays where we've discussed it a lot. We have an all-female show today on a Wednesday. It is so important, especially in these media spaces that are dominated by white men with conservative tendencies, where the algorithms, also something that is being addressed on Capitol Hill today, where the algorithms are skewed more towards conservative male ideologies. It is so important right now that whoever has a platform and the ability to speak out talks about these issues, because reproductive justice is it is a civil rights issue. The majority of women who seek and get abortions because of financial issues. Now, of course, there are horrible other reasons, but they're personal decisions. And, over the last 40 years, the conservatives have made this essential piece of their experiment. So even if this is not your issue, which, I hope you're an ally regardless, but even if it is not your issue, understand that this is a principal issue that they have organized around that has gotten them a ton of money to win elections at the state and local level. So if you think that, identity politics, talking about women's rights, is too much, understand that they use it as a tool, and that is how they have been able to win elections. So this is a very important issue right now, and it is intersectional, and it does have to do with economic justice. So if when we talk about these issues on the show, we're not a reductionist. My perspective is not reductionist. I understand that there are overlapping issues, that there's intersectionality here, and if you're not able to get there, then we're going to help you get there. So for those who have had an abortion like myself, or those who believe in reproductive justice, this is an extraordinary campaign by Shout Your Abortion. You can check them out at hashtag Shout Your Abortion, at Shout Your Abortion, Shout Your Abortion, hard to say actually, on Twitter. And of course, the website, the hashtag right now is Abortion Pills Forever. And this is all because SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, may overturn Roe v. Wade. But Shout Your Abortion wants you to know that abortion pills are safe, legal, and widely available online. So if right now you live in a state where it's very hard to access an abortion, you can still get abortion pills online, and they can be distributed to you and mailed to you at your address. This decision in Dobbs will very likely lead to abortion being banned in half of the United States. Abortion pills by mail are the best tool we have to minimize the impact of whatever anti-choice legislation we see passed in coming years, and everyone in this country needs to know about this ASAP. So feel free to use whatever messaging you have out there, but I am using my tools and I'm asking you to do the same. This is an extremely important day. This fight doesn't go, no matter what happens with the ruling, you can continue this campaign moving forward so folks know. And it's, there are people who are now willing to sponsor. They're nonprofits because they're usually, if these pills are safe and they're about $100 a pop, but there are also organizations out there. Go to this website. You'll learn more. Shout Your Abortion. The information is in our info section. And of course, the hashtag, you want to go online and spread it around, is Abortion Pills Forever. Hashtag Abortion Pills Forever. We have an extraordinary show today. I'll display my abortion pills one more time so you all see it. If we can put that on the main screen. Use this as our main shot. I want y'all to see it. This is important, very important. So distribute this information out there. You can go to the website and share it with your community and keep it going. We have an amazing show today. We have Melanie DArrigo. Melanie DArrigo, you may recall, has been on the show before. She ran in 2020 against Tom Souzzi. He is currently a congressman in Long Island and in a slice of Queens. He's representing the 3rd Congressional District of New York. He is a blue dog bad guy. He is one of those obstructionists. And now he has announced that he is running for governor, and that seat opens up. Melanie DArrigo is running again. She has been running, and she's been kicking butt. She's also a matriarch candidate, for those of you who know that we cover matriarch on the show. Melanie, how's it going?
Hi, Nomi. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me back. Love to be here. Things are going really well. As you can imagine, the last couple of days have been pretty exciting for us.
Yeah, so you did very well last time. Let's just remind folks what inspired you to run the first time you ran against Tom Souzzi, and then we'll get into the type of leadership he's the type of leader he's been since he's been in Congress and why that matters.
Right. So, I'll try to sum it up quickly. I'm one of those women that really, was always politically active, certainly a consistent voter, involved with more issue-based groups. But it's sort of apropos of the topic you were just speaking about. Obviously when Donald Trump was elected, our country was really, our racism, our misogyny was really exposed in a way that really made it come out in the open, right? And I went down to protest Brett Kavanaugh, and that experience, I think, really planted some seeds in me that I didn't even realize until later on. But at that moment, I had wondered, well, why is my congressman completely silent during these Kavanaugh hearings? And that really led me down the journey of really looking into how he's voting, and my shock at learning that what he says and how he votes are often at odds. So, the more I looked, the more I found that he wasn't representing democratic values, democratic ideals, and in many cases, not even supporting critical democratic legislation, but often, deciding to caucus with Republicans and support their bills or obstruct democratic legislation. And I really truly believe, and this is as true today as it was in 2019 when I initially first ran. We're in such a precarious moment in this country. January 6th, we're hanging on by threads. It is more important than ever to elect regular people who are going to go to DC and fight for working families. So here I am. We're back to finish what we started. Obviously we could not have in any world foreseen a global pandemic. But even with that, we got a little under 30% of the vote, not being able to knock doors, being outspent 9-1. But the silver lining is that it has given us a sizable base of support to relaunch the campaign this year. So we're back. We're still fighting for reproductive rights, to repeal the Hyde Amendment, still fighting for Medicare for all, for environmental policy that'll help us realize a Green New Deal, fighting for our communities and putting or centering our families first over the lobbyists that are paying too many of our politicians to vote or pass legislation that favors them at the expense of us.
Melanie, you talk about him caucusing with Republicans. Explain to us what this little this strategic move was, because I think a lot of folks may hear about it but don't necessarily know how it functions and how it's been cover for him when he goes back to his district.
Absolutely. So he, it's actually more than one caucus now, but he was most notably the vice chair of the Problem Solvers, or still is the vice chair of the Problem Solvers caucus. This is a caucus that in theory works on bipartisanship. It's a caucus that is composed of the equal amount of Republicans and Democrats. But when you look at the legislation that they actually support, it's a corporate agenda. And, unfortunately, it never favors Democrats. It always favors Republicans. Some of their big wins were rolling back Dodd-Frank, stripping accountability from the supplemental border aid bill when all the atrocities were coming out when we were first learning about families being separated from children at the border. And it is truly a vehicle of lobbyists, really, to control our politicians. Tom, unfortunately, has chosen to side with them over and over and over again. They vote as a caucus, and then they don't tell you their position. They just say, well, I had to go with my caucus. So it's unfortunate. Since January 6th, they've actually allowed more representatives who were involved with the insurrection and trying to overturn the election into the caucus. I think they're
Are you serious?
Oh yeah.
So it's not just that it's not like centrist. This is not like a blue doggy kind of thing where it's some centrist Republicans and centrist Democrats get together. It is literally the worst. He's partnering up with the worst far right extremists. This is Tom Souzzi, your current congressman from that district, who's now running for governor of New York, just so everybody knows.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, to me, that is one of the most shocking. Right after January 6th, we would think that Democrats would come together and at least unify that those folks should no longer be allowed to serve. If you are participating in an insurrection, if you are encouraging it and seeking to overturn the election, what is that? That is a banana republic.
Exactly.
So, that's really unfortunate. But yeah, they've welcomed some others in. He started I call it a faux caucus. It was an environmental caucus where they work again in a bipartisanship matter. And this is intentional. They have climate deniers in the caucus. So, here's the thing, and this is really important. Many of our politicians have become masters at gaslighting, and they'll tell you, well, we have to work in a bipartisanship manner. We have to work across the aisle. Now, look, I don't know a person alive that would say, well, that's a bad idea. We shouldn't compromise. But the real question is, what's under the hood? What are we compromising on? How do we compromise when thousands of people are dying because they can't afford healthcare? How do we compromise on a planet that's burning up? How do we compromise on women's rights? These are not issues we compromise on, right? You want to come to the table in good faith and compromise on, I don't know, how do we reduce carbon emissions? There's many proposals out there. Let's compromise on that. But we can't compromise with folks that don't believe that climate change is real. That is irresponsible governing.
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that they also don't publish their internal votes. I mean, this is one of the most insane things that I heard, and it's we had our own version of this, obviously, in New York State that you're aware of with the IDC, but this is a little bit different. They have a membership block, they vote internally, and then they don't release who voted for what. So, let's just create a scenario in good faith where you have 7 Democratic members and 7 Republican members, and 6 of the 7 Democrats vote for something involving, the green, like I'll just say the Green New Deal. I'm just making something up. And 7 Republicans and 1 Democrat vote against it. It doesn't matter because at the end of the day, as a unit, they all have to vote publicly the way the internal vote went. Except the problem is you don't know who that is. You don't know if there are actually 6 Democrats, voting for the Green New Deal and how they're going to act as a caucus. It could be everybody. So as you said, it's like what happens underneath the hood. I just don't understand how this is not a bigger deal. I guess it's not a big deal in Congress because of the majority, but it's just like people are learning a little bit more about Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin's histories and their moneyed interests and how they work in a quote unquote bipartisan way, and not buying it. But it had to happen when there's so much on the line. I think, does he see the writing on the wall? I mean, he's running for governor, but he's also giving up his seat.
Right. I think, I've said it for a long time. I can respect a politician who stands by their values. We can have different values. We can have vastly different opinions on policy, but it's the gaslighting that really gets us, right? And I think that stalls out any good faith governing. But I do believe it's who Tom is, that he's just more conservative. He is a conservative person. I think he believes in conservative values, and I think we're seeing that. And I think we've certainly seen it in his announcement, right? A lot of the language he used, or a few dog whistles in there, and I think he's going to try to carve that sort of Eric Adams pathway to
the mayor-elect of New York.
Right. I'm sorry. Yes. Who's I assume he's hoping, the more the merrier in the gubernatorial race so that he can occupy that right lane. it remains to be seen. Are there enough of those folks? Depends how the vote is chopped up. But I think this is who he is.
So Long Island, I mean, for folks who are not familiar with New York downstate politics, Long Island is sort of seen as a more conservative area of the state. The Democratic Party in Long Island just suffered horrifying losses this last election, lost all of their members in the state level. And maybe, that's also why he saw some writing on the wall, who knows. You have redistricting coming up. The lines have yet to be drawn. What does that mean for your candidacy? I mean, it's we've talked about this before, and winning in these types of districts and what kind of Democrat wins in these districts. But what does that mean for you when your plans this time around?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that there is a vast difference between a conservative area and an area that hasn't been organized.
Right.
For many parts of Long Island, there hasn't been historically an organizing infrastructure. There hasn't been massive get out the vote, drives. There are folks, families that their doors have never been knocked, not once. That's right? Yeah. That's insane. And I think what we're starting to see, not only around New York, but really around the country, is that when we come together and we start knocking those doors and we start engaging different sectors of the community and listening to what's important to them and start showing up for other people, beautiful coalitions start to form, right? And I'm so proud of the work that Queens and Long Island has done over the last several years. In Long Island alone, which Queens is obviously a little bit different, even though it does sit on Long Island. I like to call Queens the progressive capital of the state, because what's happening there is just truly incredible. I'm so inspired every day. But in Long Island,
Northwest Queens, not all Queens is the same.
No, but listen,
I live in Northwest Queens, so I can.
But we had some incredible progressive candidates get really close in Northeast Queens, and they continue to come, and they're building a pipeline, and it's just and it's multicultural, it's multi-ethnic, it's beautiful, and it inspires me each and every time I'm in Queens. But Long Island, I think we think of traditionally as Suffolk County and Nassau County. But there are well over 100 grassroots progressive groups that have sprung up on Long Island in the last few years. And they're out there and they're organizing. And there's been a significant amount of work to unite these groups and build in coalition together, right? Because we know as organizers, when we're building in our silos, it's hard to move the ball. But when we can harness that power and leverage each other's strengths, we're all better off, as a community. So look, there's a lot of criticism about what happened in Long Island in November. Nobody likes to lose, right? Nobody. But I will say it wasn't a red wave. Republicans definitely excited their base, with a lot of misinformation, some racism, some hate, and that was unfortunate. Because I think when we gaslight folks, whatever side of the aisle you sit on, it brings down our community. But frankly, the Democrats lost because they failed to excite their base. Many ran to the right. Many didn't have a website, didn't articulate a platform. I'm serious. Yeah, I'm serious. So, it's easy to look at the numbers and say, oh my gosh, what's happening in Long Island? There were a handful of really spectacular candidates that it was unfortunate that, they didn't have the support that they needed to get across the finish line. And I hope they'll step up and run again. But overwhelmingly, Democrats didn't show up to vote. We've got the numbers here, and we're very capable of electing progressive Democrats, folks. Like for us, we're a campaign that's trying to bring the Democratic Party back to the values that they purport to represent. When I was 18 years old, I joined the Democratic Party because I believe all people should have health care. I believe in civil rights. I believe in human rights. I believe in reproductive choice, and we've gotten further and further away from that in this region. And I think that it's going to be very exciting for folks to have a candidate to vote for instead of a candidate to vote against.
Well, the numbers were down. I understand organizing is a big part of getting people out to vote, but it also is jarring to me that on Long Island, where you do have active Democrats, that they stayed home as Donald Trump has been actively organizing and doing rallies on Long Island, as it's an extremist right wing that is popping up in Long Island. It is not like a libertarian right. It is a far right, hateful. There's a lot of hate incidents. Every day I open up the paper and there's something happening in Long Island with Trump supporters. You'd think that there would be this friction where there'd be the resistance Democrats who would show up no matter what.
Well, here's the thing. And again, I want to caveat that there were a handful of candidates that really did run for something, but the overwhelming amount of candidates ran defensive campaigns or they ran to the right. So when you're choosing between an outright Republican and someone that has really championed a lot of Republican issues, you're not motivated to vote. Right. And I think historically we have seen the grassroots come out and knock the doors anyway. And we did see that a little bit, but certainly not to the level that we've seen in previous elections. Other community members that will typically, that aren't, involved all year, but do come out to get out the vote, they didn't come out. And I think, look, if you look at the policies that, were being supported, I don't think that they excited the Democratic base. And I don't think there were enough Democrats that said, well, I'm just going to let it slide that, these Democrats are supporting optional mask policies in the middle of a global pandemic. Doctors, there's a large population of doctors in this district, and they couldn't make sense of that. How do we have a Democratic representative that in a global pandemic is saying, well, maybe kids in school don't need masks? I mean, that's not going to excite folks to vote. So there's a lot more going on than the numbers, Listen, the Democrats broke the tried and true rule. You don't excite the base doesn't come out and vote for you.
Are there other people now now that the seat's opening up, of course, when there's an open seat, everyone who's interested in running or sitting in office will come to the table. Right. Have you seen that in the last couple of days?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations happening. There are some folks that are always thinking about running, remains to be seen. We're seeing a lot of hesitancy. There's folks are very, I think, concerned about redistricting and what that may look like. We'll see. For us, we're very focused on our strategy and continuing to push forward. We feel very well positioned, having run in the last election, having an incredible amount of grassroots support in every county. We have infrastructure in Queens, we have infrastructure in Nassau and in Suffolk. And I don't think that there's another candidate, whether they're a sitting elected or someone from the outside, that has the infrastructure and the base that we do at this point. Nomi, Matriarch early endorsed me, but I'm also the first candidate of the cycle to be endorsed by Brand New Congress, the National Organization for Women, Moms in Office, Progressive Women of New York, NIPAN. We have 12 endorsements, and Zephyr Teach Out also endorsed us as well. So we're just, we're foot on the gas going all the way, because I believe, and my team believes, that every day is a gift, and this is an opportunity to bring the voice of working people to the halls of DC, and we just need it to happen.
When you get to office, what is the first issue that you want to bring to the table?
Yeah. So, there's obviously so many important issues, and it's always a hard question to identify the top priority. But what I always come back to is the influence of corporate money in politics is corrupting everything. It's where good policy goes to die. It's the reason we can't advance our agenda. And I think we need to build a bigger coalition, a bigger progressive caucus to really combat it. It's really hard, right? Because running for office is very difficult. It requires a lot of time, a lot of sacrifice. And I will tell you, as a candidate now, a second-time candidate, I don't understand a politician who sits through fundraising and then gets to Congress and says, no, we don't need reform here. I mean, we need serious reform. We need publicly funded elections. We need to make sure that regular folks have the opportunities and the access to run for office, because that is how we will have, I think that's how we'll create the world that we all want to live in. So that is first and foremost. We have to address that in a major way, because without doing so, it's going to be very hard to pass policies to help us realize the Green New Deal. It's going to be very hard to get to universal health care, Medicare for all. Listen, it's going to get hard to do just about anything in Congress. But, I've always been, I'm an allied health professional. Healthcare is something that's really important to me. And I will fight with everything I have to make sure that everybody in this country can not just access healthcare, but get healthcare whenever they need it and never have to worry about cost.
In the last year, we've seen pressure put on progressives that have been elected to the squad by folks, whether they're progressive or not, or they're online, instigators, but there's been a lot of conversation in these spaces about, well, okay, great. Now they're in and they're the squad, but they're still operating within the confines of the power structures that are determined by Nancy Pelosi. And even then, as we saw with this last fight, Pramila Jayapal was really going, who's the leader of the Progressive Caucus, was going head to head with Nancy Pelosi to try to push for more support, for more support for women, for more support for working families, and of course, protecting workers all over the country. And a lot of those fights were lost. If you're in the Progressive Caucus and you're dealing with these power structures, are you willing to defy on one issue, and stand out, knowing very well that defy leadership, I should say, knowing very well that you might lose on another issue later. And this is sort of the internal baseball folks don't want to really acknowledge, but until progressives are in the majority, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later, but it's probably not going to be, just based on historic trends. This isn't me being like a Debbie Downer. And until you're at that point where you're in the majority, and even then there's flavors of progressives, and every progressive has a different issue that they want to put forward and prioritize. So how are you going to deal with those kinds of situations? And how are you going to, because you're going to have tough choices, and how are you going to explain that to constituents that supported you?
Right. Look, I'm not going to pretend to understand the internal pressures that are on many of our electeds. But I do think when regular people run for office, by regular people, I mean those that are not connected to enormous wealth, those that are not connected politically. When we step up and run, we're fighting for a value system, right? And I fully know you'll never make anybody happy, you'll never make everybody happy at the same time, right? There are going to be issues that you're going to push on that will upset some folks. But what we're hoping to do is build a coalition based on values, right? And so my supporters will know, maybe they don't agree with me on everything, but they will always know that I'm approaching it from the right place, that I'm approaching it from a place that uplifts the people of this country and not corporations and not lobbyists, right? Because I really do think that is our biggest barrier. That being said, look, I think the only thing we can do is continue to support progressives and get more progressives elected to office, to get folks that are fighting for us. That's how we build power. You have to be strategic about it. You can't, you have to check your ego, right?
Yeah.
There are issues that are important, but you can't throw away, you can't start a fight you're not going to win to get nothing in return. So I think for me, it's important. I'm very, very excited and willing to go to bat for the issues that I care about and that my district cares about. But we have to make sure that it's strategic and that there is an end game. And, I understand, there's a lot of people upset because they feel that government isn't working for them. This has been true for a very, very long time. And I think that sometimes the squad members and other progressives, it all gets lumped on them because they're our hope, right? That's why we supported them. But at the end of the day, they're human beings also, right? Like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gets elevated to this goddess stature, and she's wonderful. But she's a human being, right? And I think sometimes when we don't get what we want, we need someone to take it out on, right? And sometimes it falls on the squad. But I would also like to elevate, Representative Cori Bush. She's been incredible. And she's one person, she's a first-time Congresswoman. Within days of being in office, she issued a resolution to expel the members of Congress who participated in the insurrection. That's some courage.
Yep.
She's there for a couple of days, just inaugurated, right? And then look what she did when the eviction moratorium was, when they weren't extending it. Congress went home. They went home, and she said, nope. And this was a really unconventional move, and I'm so here for it, right? She camped out on the Capitol steps. She called other congressmen back. Some went back. They stood with her. And President Biden extended the moratorium. Can you even think of another example where a brand new congressperson wielded that kind of power?
And this is what I love about her, and I think that you'll be able, and you know her, she was a matriarch candidate, and you were on a lot of phone calls with her and Zoom calls. And, but there is something very specific about understanding how power works that comes from the experience of running for office. And, the average number of times it takes a woman to get elected is 3 times. I'm sure that statistic's actually worse now, but I don't know when the last time it's been studied. But with that, I mean, she had run 3 times before, and she came in very clear on what her vision was, very clear on who her constituents, that she was, what her constituents were going through because she'd been embedded in the community, and very clear on not messing around, not taking it for granted. I mean, this is her exactly. This is a tweet that she put out on July 30th as she was sleeping outside Capitol Hill. I mean, and that's what it means. It's like she was an activist, but then she also understood how to push power structures internally and externally. And I think that's brilliant, and that comes through these experiences. Like, this is your second time around, and just how much, what have you learned since your first run that you're taking in and you could take into Congress this time around?
Right. Well, I mean, we'll have to do a whole another show on that. But look, every day we're always learning. But in terms of power, I think that there is perception, right? There's perception that there are some folks that have all the power. There are organizations that have all the power. And, what we've learned over time, as unpopular as this may be, look, there's power in name recognition, maybe, right? There's power in being able to wield lobbyist money, even though we don't like that. That's the truth, right? But frankly, and this is what I think Corey does so well, what we've really learned, and this is the real crux of campaigning. If you're thinking about running for office, I hope you do. But the real crux of it is nobody's coming to rescue you. There is no big magic sailboat, magic dragon that's going to say, poof, you're anointed, you're the candidate. It just doesn't happen, right? So look, you try to build your coalition. You always want to get support from like-minded organizations. You want to work together. All of that is organizing and important. But at the end of the day, it's going to be on you and your team to fight for your community. It's you are who wins the election. Your team is who wins the election, right? Your supporters that you build and cultivate, they win the election. It's not the massive organizations. It's not the one person that endorses. That's just not how it works. So I think Corey has really, like, to my earlier point, really lived her values, right? And maybe there are folks that don't agree with Corey on every single thing she supports or fights for. Maybe they do, right? She's pretty amazing. But we know that Corey's a real fighter for us, right? I think, she's quickly sailing to the head of the squad. I think she's people are very impressed with her, as they should be. But that's what happens when you fight for values, right? And I would certainly be looking to figure out those unconventional ways to build power in Congress, because I just think this is the best example of it. And we know, right, we're hearing from the Hill that there are a lot of sitting long-time incumbents that are really angry at these tactics that are starting to be used. And, like Alexandria got criticized for this, when she was first elected, when she participated in the Sunrise Movement protest, right? But listen, that's what it is. That's her constituency, and that's how we build together.
And that's how we're going to change. I mean, these are unprecedented times where clearly, you had an insurrection. If they're getting mad over these types of actions, this is when you do that. If you're not going to do it now, then when are you going to do it? So if you're not going to run now, then when are you going to do it? I mean, this is a moment, and this is a very important moment, that if you have the ability and the courage to do so, and the situation in which provides you the opportunity to do so, because that's always a part of this too, of course, then do it. And Melanie, I mean, I've seen Melanie throughout this entire process from 2020 into today. And it's really incredible to see the kinds of challenges that you faced running for office during COVID, having, let's not forget that you have kids, and you were managing the kids during COVID and teaching them. And I mean, I remember these calls where we'd sit there and be like, okay, well, how do you change a budget now that it's suddenly, you can't knock on doors anymore? And how are we going to reach voters? And it was a lot of problem solving that occurred. And so it's really just extraordinary to see how much you've grown, and you're always exceptional, but to see, what kind of campaign this is turning into. And I'm really, really hopeful that the lines, the fairies, the line fairies, the redistricting fairies are beneficial to you, and you have the best circumstance possible so that we can see you in Congress. That on December 1st of next year, we will be having another conversation, because don't forget where you came from.
Not me. Not me.
That you're on the show, or We're talking somewhere else, and
we'll book it
let you know
now.
when you
Okay,
plan to do it.
I'll lock it in with the scheduler now, so we can. I promise, I'll be there.
December 1st, same
I'll be
time.
there. I'll be
Maybe
there.
the same place.
I'll be there. Right, for
Awesome.
sure. Yeah. Can I just say one other quick thing, if that's all right? You know, when we talk about, and I always do, encouraging folks to run for office. You know, something that I have said from day one is like, look, when you win, and you have to go into it with the mindset you will win. We did last time. We're definitely doing it this time. Winning, that is, but. Every day that you are there is an opportunity to fight for people. It's an opportunity to save lives, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to treat it like it might be your last day in office, right? I think the mistake that a lot of politicians make once they're elected is they look at it and they say, well, wait, I have to not do this, or maybe I should pull back here. Maybe I shouldn't do this because it might hurt my chances of reelection. Like, none of that matters, right? We are in, it's do or die time, right now in this country. So we need to get to office and fight like every day like it's our last. So, I just want to say that because I think it's really, really important. I think Corey embodies that, as do, several others, but we need more folks like that in Congress. Thank you so much for having me. I really love to be here with you.
We have your website up there so people can get involved. And of course, contributions are always welcome and needed. When you don't take corporate money, it is not easy to raise money, especially since there's so many things that are unpredictable right now. It's really, really important that Melanie's campaign has the foundation so that she is, she's a viable candidate. She is one, and she will continue to get those endorsements so that she can solidify the left and organize the left. So we have all of your stuff up there, and we're looking forward to several more conversations, Melanie.
Thank you so much, Nomi. I appreciate you.
Thanks. Take care. We will be right back after a brief little break. So stick around and click subscribe. Have you done that yet? Did you click subscribe? Are you a patron yet? Join us now. This is the moment that you should be a patron. If you watch our show and you can throw in a little bit of money into the pot, it makes a huge difference. It keeps this one light right in front of me on. I could get a bunch of other lights too. We could have more lighting. No, I'm kidding. Join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Alicia Sperry is a reporter with The Intercept. She writes about U.S. foreign policy abuses by military and security forces and the repression of dissent. She's reported from Palestine, Haiti, El Salvador, Colombia, and across the United States. But she's originally from Italy and lives in the Bronx. Gotta share that. Gotta share it. I've never said Alicia. I learned something new today. I love that.
Thank you. And thanks for having me too.
Of course. So you have this article that just came out in The Intercept titled Anti-BDS Laws Could Upend the Constitutional Right to Engage in Boycott. And just like we're sitting here today watching the Supreme Court, possibly overturn Roe v. Wade based on a long conservative fight at the local level in state legislatures, over the last 35, 40 years, you're seeing similar actions in many other areas. It's like they're literally checking off the boxes through state level organizing at a time in which Democrats have been like MIA locally. So, tell us about Boycott, the film, and what's been happening at the local level.
Sure, and thanks so much for having me. So Boycott is a new film that just premiered in New York last month. It's produced by JustVision, which is this group that kind of, looks to fill a bit of a media gap when it comes to Israel and Palestine and really highlight, for the most part, activists and organizers in Palestine and Israel doing work there. And this film is a bit different for them because they actually focus on a very U.S. story. It's a very local story. The focus is basically on this anti-BDS legislation that for several years now has been passed at the state level across the country. There have been 33 bills passed at the state level, but more than 200 that have actually been introduced over the last several years and really have pretty much flown under the radar, which I think is what's so important about this film, is that it really sheds a light on this very deliberate, very calculated long-term effort, as you put it, to pass this legislation. Your viewers might be familiar with the fact that there was an effort to pass such legislation at the federal level. Some of it would have actually criminalized boycott in Israel, but that fell through for now anyway. But at the state level, nobody really was pushing back, and so a bunch of these bills were passed that essentially, most of them, target contractors, state contractors, so basically use the power of the state to provide money to people and companies that choose to engage with in a boycott of Israel.
Okay, so let's help me understand that more. Like, what do you mean by contractors? I mean, I think people are very familiar with what's happening with Ben & Jerry's right now and how out of control it's gotten. I was really surprised by, and they're standing their ground. But is it something similar to that, or is this Ben & Jerry's, of course, saying that they're no longer going to be selling in the West Bank?
Right. I mean, there are a number of bills. They are not all the same, although all of them seek to sort of stifle criticism of the Israeli occupation of Palestine in different ways. So in some states, in New York, for instance, we have the state choosing not to invest the state pensions in companies that boycott Israel. In other states, the punishing for kind of people that are critical of the occupation is much more direct. So we first actually at The Intercept reported about this. One of the characters in this film, Bahia Hamawi, who's this Palestinian-American child speech pathologist in Texas, who lost her contract with the Austin public school system when she refused to sign a pledge saying that she will not boycott Israel. So a lot of people kind of learned about these bills when they saw this new phrase pop up in their contract and this new pledge requiring them not to boycott Israel and promise they would not boycott Israel. Another character the film follows is Mick Jordahl, who was an attorney in Arizona who had a state contract to provide legal services for incarcerated people in the county jail system, and who also had this language thrown into his contract and refused to sign. So what this does is essentially target state contractors and withhold state contracts and withhold business from the state if people do not sign this pledge that they will not boycott Israel. And what's interesting is, one of the one of the stories that the film follows is that of this Arkansas publication, the Arkansas Times, whose newsroom was not even involved in a boycott to start with. They were not interested in the BDS movement. They were not actively participating. They just refused to sign the pledge on principle because they thought the state had no business telling them.
Because they're journalists?
Which exactly. So like what I think really is striking about this film and this story is the fact that this is, of course, about Palestine and the BDS movement, but it really is about First Amendment and kind of your constitutional liberties that, so many of us take for granted all the time that are being eroded at the state level with absolutely no pushback. One of the most fascinating scenes in the film is, I describe it in the story, but the filmmakers are interviewing this Republican state senator in Arkansas who was the main sponsor of this bill and accidentally run into a Democrat who voted for the bill, just like the rest of the state legislature, who had no idea he voted for the bill, who had never even, stopped to read the bill and question whether this is even constitutional or not. And this is really how a lot of these bills were passed. It might not surprise your viewers to know that ALEC, the American Legislative Council, was behind a lot of this legislation, as they often are behind kind of this state level conservative pushes to, get through legislation just with no scrutiny. I think that's really the key element here. There was some pushback against this legislation in some states, but really not much. And actually, one of the the quotes in the film that I think is just fascinating is this Arkansas state senator is saying, the Palestinian side was not here advocating the other side of the issue. This just flew through. Nobody questioned it. And I think it's it is so telling that the moment you present a bill as pro-Israel, there is just no questioning from Republicans and Democrats alike. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to risk saying anything.
And some of that is, AIPAC has spent a lot of money over the years, sending local lawmakers on the Democratic side and, of course, Republican side to Israel for essentially their propaganda trips. Now, that's normal for a lot of organizations to do that, especially foreign interests, but they've really, put people through a pipeline and kept them there. And for the most part, folks have stayed true. I mean, I think there have been a few people who've said like, oh, I've changed my mind. I've evolved on this issue, but they won't go to war with them. And that I think is fascinating is like, once you, like what you just said, it's just not worth it. So they just sign it. They're not going to be, necessarily the biggest advocate, but they're also not going to be an opponent. Because what happens? I mean, what happens when somebody stands up to Israel? I mean, we see what's happening with Ilhan Omar, but what happens?
Yeah, that's the problem. The political cost of saying anything that's vaguely critical of Israel is just, so huge for elected officials that nobody really wants to touch it. But what's interesting about these bills is that it's putting that cost on everybody else, right? You might be an attorney providing legal services in Arizona who cannot say anything about Israel, or you lose your job, right? You might be a speech therapist in Texas who does not want to sign this pledge. You will lose your state contract. So this is really kind of expanding the burden, expanded impact of this political influence, which is ultimately what this is. And what a lot of these people are saying who file suits in their states against this legislation, what they're saying is like, this is like such an un-American legislation to have. I mean, this goes, of course, against our constitution, but really, you're giving precedence to a foreign government. You're allowing a foreign government to meddle in our own rights. And that is really, why they filed suit and while they fought back against this legislation to really kind of uphold their rights as Americans. And one point they make, and I think the film makes very well, and that it's, is very concerning, is that this is really not just about the BDS movement. Texas, for instance, which is one of the states that had this legislation, has already used that legislation to pass similar bills that essentially make it impossible for people to get state contracts if they boycott fossil fuels or firearms. And so you can really just kind of see the possibilities of this. All you need to do is change a few words in the legislation, and you can target any other cause, on whatever side of the political spectrum, because who knows how this could be used down the line. So it's really kind of pervasive and dangerous, regardless of whether one supports the BDS movement or not.
Is it just coming from ALEC, or is this being funded? I mean, when did this start to operationalize, and where's the money? Like, where can you track it?
Yeah, so this is another really interesting part of the story. The bills came in response to growing international support for the BDS movement, which you might remember is a Palestinian-led peaceful movement. And I think this is really important because people tend to kind of not sort of acknowledge where this movement came from. This is a Palestinian civil society initiative and a Palestinian call for solidarity to the international community that was taken up in recent years and has grown quite significantly. The Israeli government, of course, has very much opposed that. And one of the kind of reporting threads this film follows is the funding that flew from the Israeli government through this non-governmental organization they set up, because they cannot directly, of course, influence U.S. legislative processes. So the Israeli government set up this group that funded U.S. groups, including Christian groups in the U.S. One of the most prominent ones is Christians United for Israel, which in turn lobbied for these bills very aggressively. And I think this is another very interesting aspect of the story. The film explores this, sort of marriage of convenience and opportunism, if you will, between the Christian evangelicals and the Israeli government, where there is this common cause that's, for the Christian evangelicals, is basically they want Israel's biblical borders to be restored so that Jesus Christ can come back to earth. And the Israeli government is very happy to go along with it as long as it builds U.S. support.
They're willing to go along with the alien theory as long as I know that's the case. It's just every time I think about it, I'm like,
it's quite fascinating. But this is, we laugh about it, but it's really how these policies are ultimately passed. I mean, the state senator in Arkansas I mentioned, he says that in the film, when kind of like no shame. He's like, when Jesus Christ comes back to earth, everybody, Jews included, will go to hell. And this is why we support this anti-BDS legislation, so that can happen faster, right? So it's really, really striking. And I think it's a story that, some people are starting to pay attention to, but it just has not garnered the amount of attention it should, I think.
Where can people watch this film if they want to see it right now?
Well, they should go to JustVision's website and check out promotional material. I am not sure whether it is available online yet. It's premiered in film theaters in New York for now. And
in New York, where can people see it?
It was at the NYC Doc Festival last month. I'm not sure if it's still screening, but it will.
I'll put that information up. Sorry.
No worries. And actually, I think JustVision does a lot of work with, kind of sending their films out to schools and different groups across the country, like really want them shown, particularly because this is the kind of story that the media tend to ignore, right? So even the anti-BDS legislation itself, with the exception of some local coverage of these different lawsuits where they happen, there just has not been a very significant effort to cover this bill systematically, to watch what's happening across the country, to just follow these legal challenges, which, by the way, is a very important part of the story, because, some of the plaintiffs some of the people who are profiled in the film won their lawsuits against their states, against Texas, against Arizona. But the Arkansas case actually is up at the 8th Circuit right now. They originally lost, appealed, and won, and now the case has been reheard, and it could end up before the Supreme Court, which obviously has massive implications for the right to boycott anything.
Exactly, which is free speech. I mean, I think the most fascinating aspect of this is essentially a foreign government. I mean, you could say the same thing about Saudi Arabia. You could say the same thing about any foreign government. We have more freedom to challenge our own government than we do other governments, which is, oftentimes we say that we're the empire and we're the colonizers, but makes you think a little bit.
Yeah, but what's interesting about these bills is that if the government rules, as the Arkansas Attorney General is trying to do, that you have no right to boycott, that is not a constitutionally protected right, which, by the way, is a paradox, because the Supreme Court has already ruled that much. 40 years ago, there was a very well-known case about the boycott of white-owned businesses in Mississippi, and the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that that boycott is actually constitutionally protected. But now we're back in court, and there are, the government's trying to interpret that differently, and maybe suggest that you can actually call for a boycott but not engage in one. And so, as we've seen with abortion and other things we have long taken for granted, that's back in question. And it really, I think, shows how fragile the constitutional protections we take for granted are, and how insidious this legislation is when you don't pay attention. As was the case with abortion, you have all these bills being passed at the local level here and there, and there's, eventually something sticks. Eventually you get a judge to rule in favor, and this is where you end up, back in
especially if you have conservatives who've just dominated in appointing these justices for many for life. And of course, the Democrats, theme of the day, when Democrats don't exist locally, you have Republicans dominating, and this is their 40 plus year experiment, is to take control at every single aspect of government. And then Democrats come in, have the Senate, the House, and the presidency like once every 20 years and then lose it. So
when it comes to Israel, there's basically no difference between
exactly.
Essentially. So that in general, yes, that's of course the case, but it doesn't even matter here, basically.
But the local, using this as a precedent now, I mean, this is the problem, is that if there are Democrats who have the same beliefs, Zionist-led beliefs, that's one thing. But now this is take your beliefs aside and look at it from a legal perspective. There are a lot of, this is where the law and being a judge is important. You might have a personal belief over something, but then there's just the constitutional right. And it could be a precedent for so many other things. And which is why, that one case was one, even though it's clearly leaning towards white business owners. So.
Right. Yeah. And what's interesting with the Arkansas Times case, which is now at the 8th Circuit, is the state senator who lobbied for this bill is actually saying, I don't care if they lose business because I don't like what they publish anyway, which is really not about Israel, not about he's kind of, like saying the silent part out loud. Like it just, the fact that there is no interest in kind of protecting your state's newspaper's right to publish what they like, let alone the right to boycott, which they're not actively engaging in, is really just telling and kind of terrifying, frankly.
Slippery slope. Alicia Sperry, reporter at the Intercept, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing this story. It's super fascinating. Hopefully folks will be able to check out the film wherever they are, even if they don't agree, because that is a right that we have in our country, is to be able to see different sides of an argument. And even if you don't agree with, understand that fundamentally we have constitutional rights, and they're just basically tapping into a nerve and an opportunity to organize around fundamentally cutting our rights, whether or not, that's their agenda or not. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And to everybody else, please join us on Femme Friday, this Friday. We're going to have a jam-packed show. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you to our team here, David, and thank you to Ruthie and our guests, Melanie DArrigo and Alicia Sperry from The Intercept. Always grateful to everyone. Stay in solidarity, and we will see you on Friday.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.